Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you are a returning subscriber, hello, bestie. Welcome to the Ethics Experts. Hope you're having an amazing day. You see what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts? You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So hit that subscribe button. I am here with the man. We're doing a little redo here. I'm here with Charles Schwager. How are you, Charles?
Good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We were just kind of joking around that we've both had a week full of Mondays, so I appreciate you digging deep today to hop on the Ethics Experts with us. So, you're somebody I've connected with on LinkedIn. We've interacted a bit, and you're somebody who I kind of think gets it. I think you have a lot of opinions, and they all pretty much seem to be right. So I'm excited to get you on here because I think you have a really unique background. You've been in some interesting scenarios and in some interesting situations. And this is our opportunity to get you up on the soapbox to pick your brain and learn, try to absorb some wisdom if we can.
All right. Well, that's high praise. I appreciate it. I don't know if I can live up to it, but I'll try.
Yeah, no pressure. No pressure, okay? So why don't we start with how you kind of got into this game. You've had a long career in the ethics and compliance field at a lot of, like I said, interesting companies and situations. When you were 9, you probably weren't dreaming of being in the ethics and compliance game when you were older. So how did you leap that chasm?
And my wife is a lawyer also. We always laugh at where we are today, where we started and thought we would be, are totally mutually exclusive. So, I started as a litigator at a big firm. I ultimately went in-house to do significant litigation at a financial services company. And one of the first things I was able to work on were some industry-defining class actions that this company was experiencing. And it was not alone, and every company was doing it. And as part of the settlement of those cases, the industry agreed to self-police itself and create really, comprehensive compliance programs to kind of respond to the event so it won't happen again. And so I went from, settling it as a class action lawyer to going on to the compliance side. And I became a vice president of what we called pre-sales compliance, and all the chief compliance and ethics officers of the different life insurance companies we owned reported up to me. And that was my first taste of compliance. And I did that for a couple of years, and then that was some 20 years ago. And then at the same time, the new privacy regulations came out that required financial services companies to tell you what they were doing with your data. And for a while there, I was the chief privacy officer doing those first privacy notices that are now a standard thing. So, that was kind of my exposure to it back then. And then kind of it went from there, and I've done a couple of other things. And then I was at another company in the energy space as the chief compliance officer for several years, and then came to waste management about 4 years ago as the chief compliance and ethics officer.
So in that first role where you were on the litigation side and then you went in-house and you had all of these chief compliance officers reporting up to you, what was that like when you first kind of jumped into that pool? And what were some of your surprises in trying to navigate those waters?
Well, I think I had mentioned to you that, later in my career, when I would go into some of the CLEs and you'd listen to someone speak about all the great things they're doing at their compliance program, you would later find out that they were under a deferred prosecution agreement, or they were in trouble, and this is what they were doing. And you would get an inferiority complex about what you were doing when you didn't have that mandate. But that first job was really, we had that mandate, and they were putting together pretty quickly a fairly expansive program that was going to have this industry certification that you were required to get at that time. And that really kind of dictated what we were doing from a compliance side. So it was a challenge to try to assimilate in a state regulatory environment to all the different life insurance regulations. There was some federal stuff when you're selling a security product, but every state had their own type of regulations, which were somewhat similar but different. So it was just a challenge to try to coordinate and get everyone to be more standardized about what we were trying to do and accomplish.
And as you look back on your career and where you're at now, that, being under that monitorship or that deferred prosecution agreement that you stepped into, what impact did that experience have on how you looked at building programs going forward?
Well, I think so. That one was self-imposed by the industry, so we didn't have a third-party monitor or anything
Okay.
like that because this was a long time ago, and we never got to that point in the process. Luckily, it was not a criminal type of
Okay.
allegation. But when you have this kind of mandate to do something like that, I think you can grow quicker and maybe not smarter. And I think as I went to the other companies and I was instrumental in building out those compliance programs, you have to leverage your existing resources. You really have to get buy-in to get anything done there. And it's more difficult, but I think it becomes more lasting in that kind of environment because you can get your stronger foundation built in and kind of grow. And you don't have the ability to grow too quickly, too fast with too much money because you're not gonna get that immediately.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, right? When you see a puppy that still thinks it's like a baby, but it weighs 60 pounds and it still has those massive paws. That's something that grew a little bit too quickly and hasn't been able to learn its body, so to speak. And I see what you're saying. I guess when I asked the question, I thought you'd say, well, it was phenomenal. I got to, we were unfettered. We just had to put all these things in practice and we couldn't cut any corners. But when you talk about it that way, it really does juxtapose how perhaps some bad habits could be built in that kind of scenario, or conversely, how the right habits need to be sort of developed in a more typical scenario where you have to do buy-in, or you have to get buy-in and you have to actually collaborate with folks, and you don't have the tailwinds of this sort of pressing regulation or this situational problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah. No, I think that's accurate. Yep.
So when you made the jump over to, as you made that transition into energy, what were your biggest takeaways from that? What were your biggest surprises? I think at some level the uninitiated may think that there's a ton of overlap between compliance functions at large, sort of across industries. Like at least similar principles are applied, but I'm sure that the nuance of hopping from one boat to the other is very different. What were some of the skills that you felt like, man, I really got to learn, or as you look back, you can point to and say, man, had I not developed that, I wouldn't have been as successful as I was in that role?
Well, everything is a journey, and not only compliance, but a lot of the other things we embark on. But some of the skills were transitive, which is what I thought they would be. But it really focused in on every company is different, every job is different. You can be a chief compliance officer at multiple different places, have a totally different scope of responsibilities and an expectation from your leadership team as to what you're supposed to be providing to the company. And, it really made me appreciate taking the time to really understand the business. And that, not just generally, but, the relationships, how it works, who's the decision makers are, how the company makes money, how it's structured, what the history of the company is, what are their risks. You really got to try to do that. You're never going to do it all in a day. It takes time, but it's got to be a priority that you get as much as you can before you get started. But then once you get started, you got to keep learning and keep getting that and align the compliance program, at least in my experience, again, which could be different than somebody else's, but align the program with the business. I think you've got a much better shot at being successful, long-term when you do that. And it's a challenge. And that's why, I do believe that you got to set the foundation piece at a time, get it working, and then, keep growing it, from there.
Yeah. You and I have kind of vibed out on this thing where you go to these conferences and you get somebody up there speaking and they have all these great ideas, and sometimes they're not really well informed by an actual practitioner, or there's this nice, sort of amorphous theory that it's hard to bring that down into practice. Given that you have the experience you have, what advice would you give folks, and maybe it's this monitorship thing you alluded to before, but what kind of advice would you give folks in avoiding that sort of imposter syndrome or that insecurity that can come from this picture that's painted from afar of another program that seems to really have it all together, and all of your own warts?
Well, I would caveat it for what you said at the beginning. I don't have all the answers. I don't know. I'm constantly learning. When I go to these the meetings and I try to listen, because But typically what I do, and I tell people even when they're listening to me, don't think that anything I'm going to say you're going to directly replicate or take or make work at your company. You got to take it, think about it. How does it apply? How would it work at your company? Typically what I will hear, that's not what I'll end up trying, ultimately once I come back. But, thematically, it might be, very similar to something, that I've heard at a conference. I think that there are a lot of great ideas out there. But ultimately, you got to be able to execute. And what you can get done at your company might be different than what someone else can get done. And then what their experience has really been, or how broad it is or how successful it is, might be different. And so you shouldn't feel that inferiority because you're not doing that, but you should try to take what you can from it and see if you can apply it and see if it would work at your respective company for your respective job, whatever that is.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point before when you were talking about learning the business. And I think a lot of folks, they think I got to learn the business, and they naturally gravitate toward the objective. Well, what markets are we in? What regulations are in place? What are we trying to sell? What are the risks that are kind of inherent to how our business is set up in these different silos and the walls that are between them, that have been erected? But you touched on some of these sort of softer things, these more, these things that are below the surface, less tangible. And you were talking about understanding the relationships and the dynamics that exist between departments, or the incentives that individuals may be facing as you try to roll something out. When you stepped into this energy company, or when you stepped into your current role and you embarked on this kind of, an exploratory process, this might sound stupid, but how do you prioritize that discovery? How do you know where to look and which conversations need to be had, and which dynamics you need to really digest in order to be most effective?
I think you always start out with a game plan on, who you're going to talk to, how you're going to learn about the company. That can change. I mean, you can't spend, 2 years talking to people and never build a program. And so, I try to figure out the core people to talk to and listen and ask a lot of questions, listen to them, see who they refer me to. But, we've talked about the concept of structured collaboration, and I came up with that because it just doesn't happen. You've got to make it happen. So you've got to set up, in my experience, that's setting up, whether it's routine meetings, with certain stakeholders, whether it's compliance and ethics committees, we have compliance forums with our area leadership teams. Anything I can do to kind of keep that pace of a communication loop and working together with people is really what can make it worthwhile, because what I'm trying to do is operationalize compliance. And I know that's a buzzword, but to me, that means it just becomes part of the routine. It's aligned with the business. It's working with the business. It's part of the business. And it's just something that is getting done. And that's, again, you never get there. It's hard to do, but, having these ways that you create the structure around it can help facilitate that, and make it more meaningful long term.
And so when we're talking about this structured collaboration, is it as simple as just saying, hey, these are a group of folks that I need to meet with on a regular basis? Does it get down to, agendas, or, what does it actually look like in action?
So I think what it looks like in action is different for every company. It's different in the last two companies I've been at. When I came to this waste management 4 years ago, I kind of had a vision in mind as to what I was going to put in place. And after 6 weeks, it became clear to me that what worked there for me was not going to work here. It was a totally different business, structured different, similar in kind of revenue, but one was, 10,000 employees, but much more asset based. One was 50,000 employees, less so, much more of a people thing, structured differently. And so I had to deviate and kind of change how I was going to do it, to structure it. But it's not necessarily meetings, or one-on-ones or things. So those can work too, depending on what you're doing. But really, these compliance and ethics committees that are documented or formal with agendas and charters and have the right people participating. And we do it by topic. So we'll have one for safety or environmental, for fraud, for employment practices, for immigrant, whatever our topics are, and then identifying and getting the right people, into those committees, involved with those committees, cross-departmental, cross-functional. So when you meet, you can have a productive meeting. Now, some people will say, well, you should just be doing that anyway, and that just kind of happens organically. And that's right. We always say at those meetings, it's not like this is the only time we talk about it.
Right.
And then you go away and you come back another quarter and you never talk about it. That's really not what we're talking about. But it gives us a point in time to get together, to make sure we're identifying and mitigating our risk, to make sure we're staying abreast of what's changing, that we're looking at our data, that we're kind of doing those things. And even though we have several of those, they're not all created equal.
Okay.
Some are more advanced than others. Some go in another direction than I would have anticipated. And it kind of is what works for that group and that topic. And, I've kind of got a minimum expectation level. And if we go above it or go a different way, and if that works, then, that's what we do. So, it's just being pretty fluid, with that, so we can kind of, keep advancing on it.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's kind of a mindset. So yeah, we'll have these, if you have a commitment to being healthy, well, yeah, you're going to go to the gym at all these other times, but there's probably going to be a bunch of behaviors that aren't on your list of things that you're going to do to be healthy that you ad hoc just do. You'll take the stairs instead of taking the elevator, or you'll skip dessert, or whatever those things are. And that emphasis, or that leaning into this, structured collaboration, I can see how that can lead to a lot of leverage within the organization to truly, to your point, operationalize compliance, which is really what this next phase of the game is.
Yeah.
So let's rewind a little bit, and let's go back to, you're in law school and you wanted to go into litigation. What was it about litigation that was particularly attractive to you, and how did that experience differ from what your expectations were?
Well, I'm probably one of those people. If you step back even further, I went to law school not to be a lawyer, but thinking it would be good to have a professional degree. Everyone else, and I didn't want to buy a suit to interview back in college, so everyone was going to medical school or law school back then, and that's just kind of what you did.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I did. I never thought long term, that I would be a practicing lawyer. I kind of thought, it was a good place to start, and then of course when you get in there and you start looking at jobs and what you get paid, and you got college debt and you got other things, then, you start going where it is.
Right.
And litigation made sense back then because the corporate world, when I came out of law school, was pretty slow, and litigation was the hot ticket thing at all these big firms. Now it's a totally different world,
Yeah.
With what's going on at the firms. I kind of knew that I always wanted to be a plaintiff's lawyer or go in-house. And I wanted to do something different. I liked the plaintiff's law aspect, and I was a plaintiff's lawyer for a couple of years because I like that you can, take something and you can help somebody,
Mm-hmm.
But you can also make more money than at an hourly rate, depending
Win-win.
on how good you do and how efficient you are. But that can be illusory too, which I learned. So, and then in-house, to be more involved in a business setting, always seemed more interesting to me. And I think the compliance has been a good, fit for me to kind of be kind of in between legal and business, kind of in a different space than just, an in-house counsel, but obviously not on the business side either. So
yeah, it's an interesting, and the reason I ask is that I find a lot of, not all, but a lot of my, a lot of the compliance folks that I really look up to seem to have this litigation background, and I'm trying to build some kind of a theory or understand what it is from that experience that leads to these folks being so successful in this other tangential but related realm.
Yeah, I think, a lot of the skills I learned as a litigator, really, have carried over onto the compliance side, whether, it's kind of cutting to the chase, or being able to kind of digest things and, come back out and process it in a way that's understandable. The communication aspect of litigation, obviously around investigations and things like that. I've always been fairly inquisitive. So, that's part of this job too, is a lot of asking and listening, so you can get a better understanding of where people are and in that way. So I have, I'd also think, because of the way I made the transition, it really, is somewhat preventative of litigation. I mean, you're a fact maker as a compliance person. As a litigator, you inherit the facts, then you kind of, advocate and revise and organize them, and here you're part of it, which is always a little interesting. But knowing how it comes out or could play out on the other side has been helpful for me as I kind of, am in the middle of an issue, working through it.
I've never thought of that. I've never thought of that dynamic in it. Some of the other things you've mentioned, other people have mentioned, that you have to get smart on things quickly and you can't make every single argument from every single fact. You have to take some materiality of what's going to be most compelling, what's going to withstand scrutiny the most, all those kinds of things of essentially getting smart quickly and also having that human understanding to be able to, persuade and so forth in the courtroom have led there. But that dynamic, I guess, is not something I'd thought about, that you're a fact maker instead of a fact taker, and what those insights of living as a fact taker can have on making sure the facts that I'm making are going to be conducive to the outcome should it go down that path that I'm going for.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about, you guys have made this very prestigious list. You've worked at a few different organizations. You've built a few different programs. I would like, you don't have to name names or anything, but I'd love to hear you speak about what the different environments have been like as you've gone from, you've been in one organization that seems, at least from the distance, to have the full endorsement of leadership for compliance as culture, compliance 3.0 kind of approach, ethical company, great, let's do it. Have you had different sort of experiences in terms of a tone from the top at other organizations, and how, if that difference is in place here, how has that difference made your job easier or more complicated?
I think I've been fortunate to always have a strong tone at the top. They say you don't last long or you don't take the job if you don't feel that's the case. I think at both this company I'm at and the last one, the leadership was very strong about integrity and doing the right thing and being committed to that. Both companies are also very operationally driven. That's where the rubber hits the road. Yep. That focus has kind of helped shape me. So when I say operationalize compliance, I understand, where the non-compliance is happening, where the risk is happening, and what are we going to do to get out and be proactive of getting out in front of that. And you've got to go to where that is. And, it's not, back at the mothership and, sitting on a corporate floor and, waiting for it to come to you, to do it. But, Waste Management has been, honored to get the world's most ethical company designation, several times, and we've gotten the last couple of years. And, that fits this company because we have a very holistic view of compliance. I'm looking at, all the EH&S stuff, the employment. I work with all of these people. I'm not responsible for the day-to-day compliance with those groups, but, we are all, in the same boat, rowing together, working together on whether we're doing a compliance program assessment or a risk assessment or whatever it is. I'm working with all those constituencies. And, part of getting that award, it really isn't, there is a ethics component and a compliance program component, but there's a governance program and there's a component and there's a environmental sustainability, component of it too. And the company, that's always, been a strong part of that. And when we, get that award, it's because we've got a lot of different people, working together on that, and the company kind of firing, on all cylinders, across that. So, but it's a journey to get that and to stay with that and to, stay, on top of it. And that's what, we're trying to do, every day here. So.
And what does that mean to your team? What does that mean to your team and to the broader company? How important is that? How much of a badge of honor is this designation that you guys seem to keep winning?
Well, we didn't win in a couple of years when I first got here. So I don't,
well, you've been winning it recently, so that's good.
So look, we're trying to, you don't do things for awards, right? You do things because it's the right thing to do. And it fits, what we're trying to do as a company. And if we can get those type of recognition, then, I think it's meaningful, but, it's not driving us to do, anything we're doing. We really are doing these things because that is, kind of our mantra of our culture of compliance and ethics and our culture around sustainability and what we're trying to do as a company. And so you hope if you're doing a good job on that types of recognition comes, but, it's not, if you don't get it, you don't get it, but it's not, the driver of what you're doing.
Right. No, that's That's a good point. It's at least a good sort of external validation that, hey, we're doing at least some of the right things. We probably have more stuff to improve, but we're on the right track. When you were thinking of going to different positions, I'm just curious, how important was in your consideration, how important was an understanding of what the tone at the top was with respect to the ethics and compliance or governance roles that you ended up taking? Like, was that part of your decision set? Was that something that you looked at?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, I think it's an important part. Just like when you interview someone and hire them, you don't know what you're necessarily getting until the person shows up. And so you do as much due diligence as you can. But certainly if there are red flags, around that, I mean, it would be very hard to, take a job because, you could be walking into something. But like I said, I think at all the companies I've worked for, I've never even remotely felt that was a problem or, a potential problem. But anybody who's looking at these kind of jobs should definitely be mindful of that as they take a job and make sure they're comfortable with what they're, hearing from a compliance and ethics, a culture standpoint of what the company's trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, one of the worst things you can do is take a new job and there's some kind of a downturn and there's an ethos mismatch and they start trimming the cost centers and they start cutting the compliance jobs. It's sometimes hard though to find, on the front end. If you were somebody though who found yourself in that type of a situation where, maybe there was lip service paid to ethics and compliance, integrity, governance, these kinds of things from the top, but you didn't feel the real buy-in, what kind of strategies do you think you would take to try to affect it? And I guess, to use a framework, would it be kind of a top-down or a bottom-up approach? Bottom-up being, I'm going to change the world around me. Top-down would be, I'm going to try to work to change that tone on the top and turn that light bulb on. Do you have any preference or perspective on that kind of an approach?
Obviously, I haven't gotten there, and I'm sure there are stories with compliance officers who have where you're, willing to die on the hill for something. You always got to be willing to, pull the ripcord personally if you're not comfortable with something. Like with all things, it's not a seamless, easy job. So there are certainly issues and things that happen where, there's a dynamic and a lot of discussion and you need to get comfortable and you hope that the company, does the right thing and you get the right consensus. And in my history, that's always been the case. Sometimes it's easier to get there. Sometimes it's harder. But I think that, if it didn't get there, that's tough. And so you got to decide at that point whether it's the situation where you can't go on with that company, which is a hard decision to make, or, what are you going to do, like you're suggesting, to effectuate the change? Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, it's probably hard at a company to try to change the culture from outside of it. Yeah. I think you've got to embrace where you are, understand the culture, and try to enhance or refine, the culture and improve it and make it stronger. That's, you're one person, you're one function. Companies are big. They've got a lot of moving parts. Yeah. There's a lot of things going on at a company. Some companies can be really hard to get from point A to point B. I think some people that talk about compliance, they don't understand that if they haven't been at a company or in a job. It just doesn't happen, easily and overnight. And, can be a challenge. It's not because the company is doing anything wrong. It's just the nature of the business or the nature of what's going on. And you have to be patient and mindful of that as you go down the road and try to get things accomplished.
Yeah. And I guess to your point before about learning the business, it's starting to get some kind of a sense for what that pace of change is. Is it like a glacier moving? Is it like a rabbit running? What is that? And are you going to be able to exist in that type of environment? You've talked a lot, since we talked before this episode, you had this mantra about crawl, walk, run, and it really resonated deeply with me. And I've been saying that a lot with my own teams. I think I have this tendency where I just want to start running, but talk to me about this philosophy and how you see people kind of mess that up.
I think that was something, I learned by experience. I mean, sometimes, it's easy to kind of jump to the end of the book. Yeah. But you got to kind of read. You got to read there to appreciate it. Yeah. And, some of the failings that I had was when I, tried to get things done too quickly and too perfectly. And, the saying, don't let, perfect be the enemy of good, or,
Yeah.
and so I really, several years ago, just, you got to start somewhere, and you want to get it in place. Don't feel like you have to be perfect, crawl, get going, and continue to enhance and improve, what you're doing until you're up and running. I did have somebody I left a job, and they put a big poster of Qual Rock Run because they had heard it so many times. I think they were glad I was leaving. But, I got to this other job, and I was saying that, and they go, yeah, well, sometimes you got to roll over before you crawl, walk, run. I said, I hope we're ready to crawl. So, but, if you got to roll over first, then, so be it. But, I think that, that's just kind of, don't feel like you got to get it just right before you start somewhere, and start moving on your journey, and you'll, keep getting better. But that's the continuous improvement, part of the puzzle, right? Because just when you start, you're never over. So you got to continue to challenge yourself, assess what you're doing, and continue to build and improve on it.
Yeah, that continuous improvement piece is a tough one. And, when you get into somewhere where new, you have all these ideas, and sometimes it's hard to get the traction you need to move those things forward. I'd love for us to switch gears a little bit and talk about the biggest buzzword that's in everyone's mind, ESG. You guys are in a unique position for it. This is now a new acronym. It's not that new, but everybody seems to be talking about it now. It seems like you guys are a company that have already had an ESG commitment for a long time, and now somebody has just given a name to it. So as you're looking at, you're looking down at the next 5 to 10 years, how do you see ESG how is that going to integrate, infiltrate, overlay compliance functions in our businesses?
There's definitely a lot out on that right now. It's become the, it's either, we are unique in that, or not unique, but our industry and kind of what we've done it as a company, that's been part of our fabric for a long time.
Right.
We did just make someone a chief sustainability officer. And she's very strong, and they're going to be looking at kind of a very expansive role in that. And so I think that, but again, it really fits what we do and what we have done, and kind of, so it's a little different for us. We work closely with that group from a compliance standpoint, but, they're very far down the road. So I definitely, again, the difference between companies, if you're at a company where that's new, or that hasn't been the focus, the role that compliance and ethics might play in that might be totally different than you're somewhere where I am, where we're already collaborating them, and they're mature and, and doing things. So it'll be interesting to see how that morphs in. I think, clearly compliance and ethics has is part of that, puzzle, but, I think how big a part and what role would really be defined by each company, and what they're trying to accomplish and where they are on the maturity level.
And I think that kind of gets down to a point you've made in the past that, a wide versus a narrow mandate or a title is not equivalent across different businesses, because each business is different. It is different dynamics, different nuances, different title structures, and things like that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. In your mind, do you feel like ESG as a concept, as a thing, is that an opportunity or a threat for traditional ethics and compliance?
I would think it's an opportunity. Everything ties together, right? So, it's, nothing is siloed, and everything interacts and has to be, figure out a way, to work around each other and to leverage each other. So, I think it's an opportunity. I don't know if it's like, how big of an opportunity, what it really means. I've heard different theories all over the place. So, I guess we'll see how that, plays out, going forward. But, I definitely think that, it's a similar, driver around compliance and ethics and what you're trying to do culturally as a company. And it all should be working together and fit together in some way that makes sense for each, company.
Yeah, that's a good point. It'll kind of be whatever it is, depending on those circumstances in place. One question that we always get from our listeners and just other people we talk to, and one thing that folks seem to struggle with is how to show your worth as an ethics and compliance officer, not only within your team, but within the broader organization. people seem to really struggle with that. And I'd love to hear why you think people struggle so much with it and what they can do to start, affecting some change in that department.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess it kind of goes back to how the company is viewing your position and what you're supposed to be doing versus how you view your position versus, an industry that has, some views of what, your position or role should be. So, in this job, I do feel that as independent as you can be for someone that works at the company, is important. And it's something that, my boss, who's the general counsel, has been very good about, giving me that space. I have a dotted line reporting relationship to the board. I try to be viewed as that. And I think it makes sense for that to define kind of how I'm viewed at the company and what I'm trying to do. If you're not independent or you don't think you're as independent as you want, and that's kind of shaping how you feel about your job or how you're perceived, then that could be a problem. I mean, there's always been, should a chief compliance officer report to the general counsel? Should he or she report to the CEO? And there's no right or wrong on that. But I do think, depending on what your mandate is, that concept of independence, regardless of who you report to, is important. Right. As far as defining how I'm viewed in the organization, I mean, I want to be, viewed as somebody that's, additive and positive, but also, you've got a tough job to do. And sometimes you got to draw a line in the sand. You're not trying to be a yes person or a no person, and you're trying to work and collaborate and get to the best decision possible. At points, that can be viewed different ways, right, depending on how that shakes out. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to be respectful of people. You want people to respect and trust you. And, if you've got a lot of respect and trust going back and forth, then I think you're being effective and you're doing your job.
I love to ask this question. And so I'm going to ask you, because I think you're going to have a good answer. No pressure. If you can go back in time to the younger you, what advice do you wish you got coming out of law school, or just at some point before you hit a tipping point? What's a kernel of wisdom you'd like to share with yourself? And what advice or mentoring would you give somebody who's just coming out of law school, or they're just about to get into the compliance game, to help them be the most sort of impactful compliance officer they can be over their career?
Well, I can tell you the advice I give my kids that they don't listen to. So, I don't
write
know
this one down. Then, yeah.
I don't know if why any one of your audience should listen to it. But a lot of these things are so cliche, and they say them, but you do have to enjoy the journey. You are going to have successes and failures. So there's that quote that there's not a success and a failure. There's success or you learn. Yeah. And that's what I tell my kids. And I probably would have told myself and been more patient back in the day, because when you're in the moment and you're having what you perceive to be failures, they don't really feel like learning moments. It's like the end of the world. And if things don't go like you want, and like I said, I mean, if you say, I started, X as 30 whatever years ago as a litigator at a firm, and I'm doing this now, would I have ever predicted that path? I would have said, absolutely not. Why would I do that? Or how would that happen? Or, how would that get there? And so you really do just got to kind of stay in the moment, and try to, absorb it, learn, get better, improve. And, we have a mantra here: do the right thing the right way. But, I think integrity really is important. And, I try to, tell my kids that. My kids are 25 and 22, so they're not kids. But, you're going to have decisions where you're going to have to make that'll define that. And it might be easier to make the decision the other way than the harder one. And I can only advise you, but, no one was advising me back in the day, and I hope I made them right most of the time, but I doubt there were probably some I could have made better. And so I think that's the challenge, to stay in the moment, keep learning, not let your failures. I mean, if you read any of these, big executive books, they always say it's how you handle the failures that really define, who you are. And that's true. And, so it's not anything unique to me, but kind of telling myself back then, just to remind myself, that's the case. I think it's important. And I think patience isn't a virtue. I think, even more so now, everyone wants everything yesterday.
Right.
And you got to let things kind of come to you sometimes. And, that can be, a challenge.
It really is so hard though in the moment. You fail at something and you think it's the end of the world. You think your career's over. You think you're an idiot. And by you, I mean me. That's how I feel when something like that happens. But then you look back, 5 years later after something, and you are where you are, and you're like, oh, that stuff worked out fine. It's like kind of, you have to have trust enough in the process, or trust that patience is in fact a virtue almost. Like, all right, I'm going to have to sort of take a leap of faith on this patience branch, or from this patience branch, because, otherwise you're just going to be twisted up into knots all the time and constantly questioning whether you have a right to be at the table or whatever. So, Charles, thank you so much for coming on today. Any parting thoughts? Any last words of advice in case your kids happen to pick up this episode?
I doubt they'll listen to this. But look, I think everybody in the compliance space has an important role, no matter what your title, your position, your mandate. What you do is really important, and cultivate your garden and make a difference where you can around you. I think these principles, like we talked about, of the elements of an effective compliance program, like we've talked. I think those work in just about anything you're trying to do. You can fit them in. To whether you're doing export, import, or employment, whatever it is, you, and whatever level you are, you can take those concepts and build them out and make it stronger around you. And look, I told you, and I think there are a lot of people like you out there that are so dedicated to this space. I think it adds a lot of richness to what we do. It makes our lives easier to have all the free things out there. Yep. To get. And, I love the passion that, you have about it, and others, out there that have about it. And it's, it kind of invigorates me to, keep trying to learn and do better. So.
Well, thanks for saying that. That's really encouraging. I just, kind of like you, I never thought I would end up in this industry. But now as I look back, I'm like, this is absolutely the place for me. Like, I love the industry. I love the mission that we're all on. I love this special thing that we all have together in this community. We're all kind of fighting the same fight. And it's just great to meet people like you who are out there in the trenches, in the foxholes, and just learn from you guys. So appreciate you so much. You see, kids, your dad's a genius. So,
yeah, right. Okay? You take care. Stay safe out there.
All right, brother. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.